I think I would sort of consider it not so much a situation of resource scarcity, it's actually resource opportunities. And in this case of when we're looking at contemporary pastoral nomads in Mongolia, they have developed ways to make their own resources. And I think, for example, dung management is a perfect example of that. While they might not be abundant resources of wood available, say, in the Gobi Desert, what they do is they have a great resource. They have their herd animals. And so what they do is they manage them not only for their meat and their milk, but also for their dung, which helps keep the whole system running in a sense. So yeah, I think we get really concerned with this idea of resource scarcity. But on the other hand, as humans, we're very innovative and we try to figure out new ways and sort of in way to tackle those kinds of issues. And I think that the situation in Mongolia with the pastoralists there, it's a great example of that. And I think in the Near Eastern case, where a lot of my other work is being done in looking at the transition from hunting and gathering to agropastoralism, we are really held hostage sometimes by a lot of these resource scarcity models, actually. It's always about there was the climate stress, and then the animals, when they were domesticated, then the sheep and goats ate all of the graze, and we have crisis and resource scarcity. But I don't think we have actually really strong evidence for that in terms of big climate change. For example, the Younger Dryas is often cited as a motivation to start growing plants. Well, I think that remains to be seen. A lot of the recent local scale paleoclimate data is showing that that's actually probably not the case. And also looking at the uptake of domesticated animals, did these animals wreak environmental havoc? Well, probably initially not. We have to remember when we're looking at the Near Eastern case, the landscape that we see today is the result of thousands and thousands of years of grazing in what has become actually a very arid environment compared to when we first had domesticates being exploited by pastoralists, 10,000 years ago. So, yeah, resource scarcity, or again, it's just opportunities, I think. It's a really interesting question. Going off of what I was just saying about environmental change and also resource scarcity, it looks like when we have the first press of pastoralists out into what's called the Badia. So if you look in the panhandle of Jordan, we're talking about that area there. And what you had was in the Jordanian highlands, this big fluorescence of these big agropastoralist village sites with, they're growing wheat and barley, and they have sheep and goats, and they have massive architecture, two-story architecture. It's still preserved today. You can see 10,000-year-old two-story architecture. And the environment was very different from today. You go out to the Badia now, and it's a basalt desert, and you're like, nothing can live out here. But back in the day, it looks like it was actually like a rolling grassland, very, very lush, actually. And it's perfect situation, grazing conditions actually for animals. And so you have people just sort of, it looks like they're just moving out there and taking advantage of their new technology, which is domesticated animals. And now they're opening up, again, it's about resource opportunity. As an agriculturist, you might say, this grassland has no resources for us. But as a pastoralist, you're like, this is incredible. This is like a big salad bowl for my animals. And so, again, that environment was much different than today, much more amenable to for pastoralists moving out into that region. Not in my experience. That the use of fire is, it's, of course they use it all the time, but usually it's in the, where they're cooking, for example. They're burning dung fires, and so they kind of keep them going all day. They're making tea all the time. They're doing these kinds of things and cooking, but you don't see huge, trash fires where they're, or midden fires or these kinds of things. I've seen a few occasions where, well, let me rephrase that. I've heard of a few occasions where pastoralists have supposedly managed the landscape, burned pastures so they can have new growth. And occasionally I've heard of pastoralists also burning out some of the penning areas, but I haven't actually seen it. That's more of a Middle Eastern thing that's done over there. That's a really good question. I'm not sure I actually really know the answer to that. it's a valuable resource, and you see in for example in the Gobi Steppe Desert, they have wood winter camps. They get that wood from the north. But I haven't had a lot of big discussions about that, and it's something I should really do the next time I'm there and talk to people about what's the relationship with these resources of woods and plants that aren't readily available. What's kind of interesting is that even though they're rare and scarce resources, is that it's very rare for someone to take those resources if they're not theirs. So, these winter camps, for example, they're unattended during the summertime. There's no one really watching them. So somebody could easily come along and say, look, great wood, hooray, I need some. But you don't see that. There's a real sort of respect for keeping those wood and so on and so forth where they're supposed to be. So, yeah, I'll have to ask about that next time.